We would like to empower 25,000 women through smartphones. And you are the first one that we are meeting.
मुई भाविली जे स्मार्टफोन एबे जन मुई धरिली एठारे जन जे विषय आमे जानि ना हूं
माने मोबाइल धरि पारिबी तो सिखि पारबी ले मुई आउ इतानु आउ भल सामान आनी करी मुई इ दे रखी पारबी कोइ करी मुई मोबाइल थे जानि पारबी आउ कथा भी होई पारबी
आमे जदी स्मार्टफोन यूज करमु तो हमर पाखरे थिबा जिते बेले हमके जे भी पचारले हमें संग संग तांको देखि के हमें संग संग कहि पारबु कि रिपोर्ट दे पारबु तो हमर लगे निजी हेबा
केते बेले में वर्षा हेबा नि हेबा कला माने मेघ है काजे उठवा हेले हेते खन मंजी मुंजागरा फला फुली पकाले माने छोट गछ करले से टाइम थिके काम देबा मोबाइल दे
Well, thanks for staying. It's great that we've got another esteemed panel to dig deeper and further into this great topic of inclusion and connectivity, and particularly around the services that we're looking at in this area. I'd like to introduce on my left Rangu Salgame. He's the CEO of Growth Ventures at Tata Communication. It's a company that works in 100 countries. It reaches 85% of the world's mobile subscribers. He's a driving force behind the video we just saw, which is a program, an initiative to empower at first 25,000 women, but later 100 million women. How do you say that? 100 million women. That's colossal. It's phenomenal. In developing countries through access to services. He's also an avid road cyclist. Next to him, I have Irfan Wahab. He's the Deputy CEO and Chief Marketing Officer of Telenor, Pakistan. He spent his career building and improving mobile networks around the world, particularly looking at the social enhancement and the social impact that can be used. He's a fan of the great outdoors and walking in the Pakistani Himalayas. We were just having a conversation about that before. Next to him, I have Puja Abid. She is from the company Brightstar, where she manages global strategy. She has a passion for supply chain management, as do I, passionate about that. And she likes to do large-scale acrylic painting. And on the end, not last but not least, is Mark Kaplan. He is the CEO of Tone, which is he's one of the world's brightest leading mobile marketing minds. And when it comes to mobile commerce, he's piloted a fascinating program giving fishermen in Indonesia a mobile handset. All importantly, on that mobile handset was a way of finding fish. I'm going to come to that in a minute. I want to know how that works. First of all, though, I'd like to throw open to my panel an opportunity to talk about some of the pilot projects they've all been involved in different countries. Perhaps if I could get you to tell us a little bit more about the project we saw.
Sure, Tarek. As you mentioned in the previous panel, it took us almost 40 years for the first 3 billion to come online, and the next 3 billion are going to come online faster than we ever imagined. And they're going to all come from the developing world largely. And that's going to unleash a potential of unprecedented scale for economic and social change. And the first 3 billion, when we came online in the Western world, it was driven by different drivers than what we're going to see in this next 3 billion. And at the same time, over the last 2 decades or so, there have been a number of business models and other models that have emerged for financial inclusion. For example, microfinance. That has had a huge impact on women getting on livelihood means and being independent and so on. But now coming back to the technology, even today in the developed world, we have 300 million fewer women who have phones. Now, if you look at the next 3 billion, if we let that happen, we're going to miss a huge opportunity for social and business and economic change. So seeing this coming, we embarked on an initiative called Next 3 Billion, brought in a number of partners like MasterCard, Tone, Brightstar, Kiva, and others to create this forum to focus on the services side. How do we get particularly women online and be able to bring livelihood services to them so that they can get services through otherwise they would not have been able to do. So that's really the model, is to get women financially independent, give empowerment tools to women, which in turn will have a huge social impact and in turn will bring economic activity to the region.
Puja, I know you were involved in the same project. You had an anecdote about how that actually worked out.
Yes, I'm not sure the mic is working. One big problem in getting technology into the hands of the women in, in this example, rural parts of India, is actually how do you get the technology to them? And the anecdote that I had was that we actually had a gentleman on a bike rushing to meet a train that was departing from a station with phones in a plastic bag, and multiple people on the phone at midnight in the United States trying to make sure that we could translate the gentleman and make sure that we could get the phones into the hands.
You got on the right train.
Yeah,
in the
got on the right
direction.
train. That's all right. So part of the project is trying to understand how you can improve infrastructure and actually improve just delivery of technology.
So we're not even talking mobile infrastructure here, we're talking about infrastructure.
Well, no, but yeah, in this particular case, infrastructure, like literally getting the phones to them. People in rural India, if you don't have access to a web-enabled device, you can't then buy a phone online, but you can't also walk into an Apple store and buy a device. So how do you actually get the device? And that's an interesting.
Speaking of mobiles and plastic bags, Mark, you have a project that did just that. You gave fishermen mobiles in plastic bags. Tell us.
Absolutely. So we in Indonesia, we partnered with XL as part of our partnership with the U.S. State Department, and we packaged mobile devices in scuba bags, actually. So fishermen were our target audience. So giving fishermen a box with a phone isn't really going to solve that problem. So we packaged up the phone in a scuba bag with a solar charger and a SIM card, and then we worked with local NGOs and the local government to distribute the kits into the villages, and then we conducted training sessions to help with the digital literacy problem that we were talking about earlier.
Part of what was installed on those handsets helped them track fish.
Yeah, so we also talked about needs-based services. So in the previous panel, the access panel was mentioning, once you give the people connectivity, why are they going to use the internet? So what we looked at was, in going into the local village, talking to fishermen, understanding what they need, we then developed the first version of the application, just did the distribution, conducted the training, went through a monitoring, understood the shortfalls, and what we discovered was what they really needed was help on catching fish. So working with the government, we got satellite imagery of plankton data, overlay it with maps, and then the fishermen could navigate, even in deep sea, out of coverage, they were able to navigate to their catch and back, and the result was a decrease in their catch times and then increasing in their livelihood.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Research and needs-based services, Irfan, that's something important for Pakistan as well, isn't it? Yeah. Not to determine what people are going to do with their phones, but what do they want to do with them? What do they need to do with them?
Sure, absolutely. I think it has to be sort of the relevance, the local relevance has to be there. Right? So we tend to think that, once the connectivity is there and, we started the digital journey, that everyone will be, needing social or entertainment. I think the use case for mass market or for citizens goes much beyond that. So we're doing a number of initiatives. One thing I would like to mention here is about agriculture. So Pakistan is a rural economy. About 22% of GDP comes from agriculture. But half of actually our customers and the overall working class, I would say, are linked with agriculture one way or the other. So we thought, okay, how can we sort of do relevant innovation so that people see really the use of technology in their daily lives. So we started with sort of a M-Agri initiative, which is basically providing them information about how they can enhance productivity, how they can have better yields, how they can use modern ways of farming, and that has been hugely successful. Next step, which we are which is work in progress, is actually building an online marketplace where we are connecting the supply side with the demand side. All the fertilizer companies, pesticides, and building on the strength of our traditional distribution. So we have like 220,000 retailers all across the country, fairly deep rural presence. How we can convert those retailers into a marketplace where people can place orders, collect their deliveries, and linking all of that with mobile payments, which is the key. So Easy Pesa, which is one of the world leading financial services, we have about 20 million customers there. The next step is actually to take it from more of a standalone money transfer service into more integrated payment solutions for farmers, for example, where they can pay and get paid basically for their services. So I think there's a huge opportunity. The key going to be that to find those relevant use cases for different segments, whether it's health, education, agriculture.
Mike?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a great point. I mean, thinking about it as a lot of these rural communities depend on nature for their livelihood. One of the things that we learned is we were going into Indonesia, which, I mean, coming from New York City, this was all new to me. So learning about this, the harmony between humans and nature as climate change becomes more real in the developing markets, and recognizing how important that is for inclusivity, because you talk about the impact on social cohesion. How is the community going to stay together as climate change becomes more real? Safety, like from the fishermen, that same fish finder concept, the major impact that it had while it was on their livelihood also has been an impact on safety. And if you think about that, and then providing, in addition to the livelihoods principles that you're talking about with the farmers. I mean, so it really is just this holistic view of the community and everything that impacts them on a human level.
If I could, a couple of comments on the livelihood side, and being the topic of inclusion. I think the number of research and data around in terms of impact on economic activity, if number of people coming into a formal banking system or included financially, and one of the data points to 1% of population being financially included creates almost a 5/10 of GDP increase. So it's a huge economic impact. And now it's about, if we can bring tools to that part of the population. And the 3 billion we're talking about, more than half of that is at around poverty level, at or below poverty level. In spite of huge gains made during the United Nations Millennium Goals over the last few years, still a large population is at around poverty level. The question is, how do we get them included? If we can bring them into formal economic system and keep them sustained, then going to have a huge economic impact, not just in those rural communities, but it'll have a ripple effect. Think about a woman in Bali or Indonesia able to sell her weaving basket on Etsy and a buyer in Brooklyn buying it. And that's real, that's potential. And if we can unleash that kind of potential through the services, I think we're going to have a huge impact economically and elevating the poverty level as well as being social change in these populations.
Yeah, I think it's not just about people at the bottom of the pyramid. It's also about addressing the needs of our youth. In the emerging markets, there are a lot of people who are highly talented. IT graduates, for example, is a big phenomena. Giving them access where they can reach out to the marketplace, which is all of a sudden becoming a global marketplace for them, and giving them reasons to monetize through financial services so they can make money for their content, apps, or any creative ideas they have. I think that has huge potential actually to take those economies to the next level. So this is the overall comprehensive approach which we need to take in terms of inclusivity for all segments of society.
Do you see it playing out that way? Puja, in the same way, the inclusivity with direct dividends really for those who can take part?
Yeah, absolutely. But we have to remember that inclusivity is not just smartphones. It's just being able to deliver all different types of technology.
And content too, isn't it? Because one of the criticisms is that we're not getting the internet to all the world because the content, the relevant content, is not necessarily there. Do you think telcos can play more of a role in fostering that?
No, absolutely. I think that comes to Irfan's point. I think telcos are extremely well positioned. The local operators in every developing country, they know the market better than anybody else in terms of the social as well as other economic needs of the population and of the markets. So they do have a role. But if you step back from a services perspective, it's also important about how to bring people who have never had any infrastructure onto the smartphone world or the online world. These are population we're talking about don't even have road access, like don't even have power, and barely have schools in the villages, will have a smartphone in their hand. Whether it's a 250 rupees phone that we talked about, the $4, or it's going to be $10, $20 phone, they're going to have a phone in their hand. The question is now, how do we get them use more so that once they become dependent or need to have the livelihood or family health dependent on that, they will start using more of it. In turn, they're going to drive more usage. So there's a lot of symbiotic relationship between the local operators and these the new people coming online. In the Western world, we came online for very different reasons. We went online because we could do email. We went online because we could watch a Netflix movie. But this side of the world is going to come online for very different reasons. And that's what's going to drive the change, I think, and a huge opportunity as well at the same time. And we haven't, sorry. No, I think also for the first time we have an opportunity to bring this change at a scale and speed which the world had never had such an opportunity. I mean, a lot of different models have been tried by NGOs, by civil society, by government leaders, by private sector, and they all have had a huge impact over the last 50, 100 years on economic, social change in these countries. But for the first time we have mobile technology getting online which have the scaling opportunity. And that scaling coming from the demand side. If a woman or a child in a village in Indonesia or Africa says, I want to go online so I can learn, that's going to drive demand. And that's going to drive bringing them online. I think that's the kind of scaling opportunity we have.
Would you? Oh, sorry. Puja, please.
I'll jump in.
Yeah.
I mean, part of the issue, though, jumping to the access conversation that we had, a lot of the content that you'll create for these women or just anyone in developing regions is the literacy issue. That means a lot of it's streaming, video-based, etc. So it's interesting to think about how do you deliver that then in a place where it's not even 2G. It's like edge connectivity in most places.
So from one of our experiences, first of all, once you do provide connectivity, there was a lot of perception. I mean, when we were coached before we went into Indonesia to engage with fishermen, we were told the fishermen were very private. Once we provided them the device, they went through training on how to use it, we found that they created a lot of their own content, which was amazing. And thinking about it in the context of women's, we've started doing some initial tests in Indonesia around women. And we started working with a sex trafficking center where women were recording their own, documenting each other about their experiences. And the concept of enabling those women to have a voice to help others, that local content can't be conceived in a conference room. You have to go and you have to engage locally. It's a human discussion. It isn't a technical conversation as it relates to locally relevant content.
You seem to be suggesting there's not enough of that it is R&D, isn't it? It's
it
research,
is.
It's testing, it's exploring.
I was thinking about your R&D question, and I was thinking how it was my response to it was going to be different. Yes, there can always be more R&D, like Yael said on the previous panel, but in thinking about it in terms of inclusivity, it's got to be a different approach. It's got to be a human-to-human kind of an exchange. Because there isn't an algorithm that can be deployed to someone who hasn't been online before. It's a different kind of concept altogether.
If I may add to Mark's comment about the human-to-human part, I think we have an opportunity. Envision a situation where villages in Africa or Asia or South America, you have young kids becoming Android developers. That's a viable thing. You think about the women in the video, the kids, for the first time they had a smartphone in their hand. They're already getting ideas that we could never imagine that you could get from a population which is for the first time looking at the phone. Very soon when they have phones, they will be getting online. The kids will start becoming app developers. And it doesn't take a lot to be an app developer. And then you can start looking at seeing a lot of local content being developed. So there's a whole ecosystem that will develop in those parts of the society that we today can't even envision. I think that's the opportunity that again will come with this. The local content will be developed and a lot of local participation will happen in that.
I think that ecosystem we see every day is being developed, but I would like to take the discussion forward. If you look at some of the next mega trends, I would say, and then how, I would say developed world going to be different from emerging world is, for example, one area which I think of is Internet of Things. I think because we do not have enough infrastructure in place in a traditional sense, as well as from a technological sense in the emerging part of the world, that is, companies or the industry verticals don't have to think about replacement cost. So we can go and start building industry verticals, whether it's textile, whether it's security, shipping, logistics, supply chain, making use of IoT technology, which gonna be really helping those economies leapfrog. So some of the things which we are doing in Pakistan, for example, is Pakistan is one of the largest, actually 5th largest milk producer. A lot of that milk, got destroyed during the supply chain and transportation and all that. So we're working with one of the large FMCG client basically on automating the supply chain, and also through the use of technology and smartphones where they can actually test the quality of the milk, they can actually pay the milk farmers then and there in real time through mobile payments, right? So replacing the entire inefficient value chain by very efficient value chains. And then there are other examples of remote monitoring systems, other industry verticals where we see huge opportunities which never existed before. So I think we are these are really interesting times of great opportunities.
Puja, we're talking supply chain management here. Would you concur with that IoT, Internet of Things, has an important role?
I think it does have an important role. I mean, I think the first step, though, is to make sure that devices are in their hands, and that people know how to use that in an efficient way, and then IoT is kind of a second layer on top of that. It's first things first.
Yeah, I mean, looking at supply chain, it goes back to one of the use cases, and you mentioned FMCG, and just imagining what you can do with getting transparency into supply chain for the FMCG is to be able to see the transactions and get visibility into local communities. I mean, a lot of investment in FMCG and altogether marketing money goes into big box retail. But the percentages of revenue that the traditional trade makes up vastly outweighs the traditional trade. But because there's so little visibility into those small communities, it's very difficult for large companies to justify investing in there. So as we're talking about how to bring up livelihoods, the ability to create transparency in supply chain and efficiency in supply chain into the more difficult to reach places that represent such large populations could drive huge investment into these communities and thus bring up livelihoods indirectly.
I wonder too, we've seen the handset price drop. Competition's stiff. I mean, it really is driving prices down in most countries, particularly in the emerging world. But I wonder, is there a risk there that's a race to the bottom? It's great for someone who wants to buy a handset, but it's tough times for telcos as well.
Yeah.
Irfan?
Yeah, so I think it's still one of the biggest barrier is the cost of devices, right? So that has to come down. I think, and then on top of that, the previous panel talked about some other barriers, for example, taxation. So I think we all have to play our roles in bringing the cost of those services down, whether it's the infrastructure. There was some discussion about whether we're pricing our services right. I would argue that data connectivity in some of the emerging countries are actually very cheap. We are almost at the cost level, and so it's not we need to look at the entire piece of the value chain, whether it's devices, whether it's taxation, whether it's spectrum, and how attractive prices it's available basically, because these are some of the barriers which we need to really work in order to make sure that the next 3 billion are connected. At the earliest opportunity.
Yeah, one of the things, a lot of emphasis on the supply side in terms of getting connectivity to the next 3 billion. I think it's important that side of the equation, but if you focus on the demand side and generate the demand, whether it's to services, content we talked about, livelihood needs and other needs, that will drive the 3 billion to demand more services online, that will automatically drive the demand for more data, more bandwidth, and there will be a market force that will be able to willingness to pay for that. I think that's a very important part. I think we focus on the supply side, trying to give free bandwidth, make the regulators just focus on the bandwidth again. I think that's an important part, but we should not. I think the focus on demand is what is going to make the biggest change, I believe.
Do you agree, Mark? Demand is the driver?
Absolutely, without question. The demand leads to economic viability of the business model. I mean, Vincent was talking about business models earlier. Economic viability has to be front and center. Otherwise, what happens is you build dependency on something that's not sustainable, and it actually has a counterproductive effect.
Tata's been running these pilot programs with women. Now, I know you've done programs in Nigeria and Guatemala. Is that right?
We are about to start. We are in the design planning phase.
You have run some of the. I wonder whether there's some early learnings from these pilots, perhaps unexpected things. You thought it was going to run this way, but people used their devices or came online and wanted to do different things that you didn't expect.
Sorry for the coffee. When we ran this program a few months ago, we were to launch in 4 countries. In addition to India, it was Nigeria, Guatemala, and Indonesia. And we are in the phase of developing. India was the first trial which we started. So a bunch of learnings. One, and a lot more to come as the pilots get executed and a lot more data gets collected. One, I think we had a lot of surprise element in terms of reaction and creativity and on what could be done with the tool like this. The other important part where we have started putting a lot of emphasis is around one of our partners brought in what is called as the graduation program. So when you bring a lot of financial inclusion tools in this part of the target population, it is about sustaining. It's easy to give a woman 500 rupees or rupiah and go buy 2 goats and they get to start a business, which is a great microfinance model. But how do you sustain and build a business from there? I think so that learning has brought us to bring in what is called as a graduation program with a partner called Trickle Up, which is a New York-based NGO, which has very successfully over the last 30 years developed this 2-year graduation program for microfinance, grant awardees. And that we are bringing into the smart world. And that's a huge learning. If we can bring that in, and every woman who gets online and gets included financially and goes through a 2-year graduation program, I think it's going to have a huge impact from a sustainability perspective. So that's another big learning for us in the process.
Yeah, so I think I'll come back to the point of local relevance. So some of our learnings is that, in an emerging world, there are no sort of credit bureaus. So you need to really find a way, whether it's microfinance and for a cause. So what we have experimented is actually credit scoring model based on our telco base, basically.
Because we have scoring model, so
like
a credit rating, but with your telco.
Yeah, exactly. So if Tarek is using our services for the last 5 years, paying us X dollars every month, compared to someone else with a smaller amount, obviously you qualify for a bigger loan. So we tested with some handset lending so far. We are actually looking into expanding into other areas, whether it's livestock, whether it could be a smaller microfinance loans. So I think need is mother of invention. So we need to find a way, basically, where we can really drive those innovations in the local relevant context. I think that's the key.
We've got 3.5 minutes to go. I want to throw this out, the question I put to the former panel again. Is there a missing link here? Is there something we're not doing we should do that we can leapfrog ahead? It was Spectrum was the big one we raised earlier. Rangu, is there something you think we're missing, a trick we're missing here?
I think we are missing, but I think a lot is happening, which brings a lot of hope. I have hope for the future here, what's happening, which is I think there's no one company, one organization can solve this problem. I think we believe, and I strongly believe it's an ecosystem, it's a partnership model. You need to bring the private sector, you need to bring the NGOs, you bring the civil society, you bring the government together in a model that all parties attain their personal goals. I think that's the future of this next 3 billion, is bringing these multiple parties together and be able to succeed. I think it's already signs of that. We've taken the same approach, and I believe that's going to drive the change that will bring this change of economic and social opportunities.
Working together. Irfan, have you got a...
Yeah, so I think we need to move away from this incremental humdrum and think really big, because these are like real challenges. These are massive challenges which you're facing. The opportunities is there, but we need to really crack the code. And I agree, it's all about collaboration, it's about partnerships, it's about working together and creating that ecosystem and bringing those pieces together. I think that's the hope, but we need to really challenge the status quo and think big.
Mm-hmm. Puja?
And perhaps on a smaller scale, we can also work on increasing the ecosystem of refurbished devices. So, one thing that we didn't get to talk about is we have cheap smartphones, but also there are a lot of smartphones that are 1 or 2 generations old that are perfectly good technology, and especially in areas where you don't have the best connectivity, those phones will do just fine. And as you start seeing that that kind of circular behavior around selling phones, moving them into the right areas where people can afford those phones and get good technology, and then the demand increases, and then when those people are again selling those phones, they also can get something back.
I need to introduce you. I met an analyst yesterday who's come to 19 of these events in a row, and he told me he has 1,000 phones.
I'll buy them.
Can I add a data point?
He's going to suggest next year, to mark his 20th year at World Mobile Congress, that he actually has a nostalgia stand where he can bring his phones along for all to see.
It's fantastic.
It's great.
I was just going to add a data point to Puja's comment, to your comment as well. In US and Europe combined, we recycle or throw out 400 million phones every year. 400 million. And most of the phones,
what we can do with those if we move them into the right hand.
Yeah.
Mark, final thought?
So I think one of the things that we learned really was the codependency on a few things. One is to Rangu's point, the required cooperation between governments, operators, and the broader marketplace. And the next thing is in learning what the biggest barriers are to achieving inclusivity, we looked at something that we're calling like a 5 pillars of progress. And what this really does is it's to break those barriers, ensure inclusivity, and the first one is partnerships, right? Because that way we can ensure locally relevant content and the distribution of affordable devices and services. The second one is content, not just for the relevance, but quality control, right? And desirability of the service that we're trying to promote. The second one is marketing and public relations. A lot of this gets shunned. But the reality is people need to be aware of services if they're going to be adopted, right? Then there's distribution and training, which is getting the product physically out into the villages, and then the ongoing monitoring and reporting. And without those 5, there's always going to be a gap.
Look, I'd like to thank the panel. We're going to work together. We're going to recycle our phones, and hopefully the 3 billion will be online before we know it. Thank you very much, Mark, Kaplan, Puja, Abid, Irfan, Wahab Khan, and next to me here, Rangu Salgame. Thank you very much.
Thank you.